My name is Sumaya. I'm an architecture major and a computer science minor here at Wolsey College. And today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Mr. Ivar Tallo, who is the executive director of the Allazo Polis Foundation. So just kind of going in on the full introduction, Ivar Tallo is the founding director and a board member of e-Governance Academy and currently of Allazo Polis Foundation. Before that, he was a member of Parliament of Estonia and member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. He has also worked as a foreign policy advisor to the President of Estonia, and he has been lecturing on public policy and public administration at Tartu University. He was the author of the Basic Principles of Information Policy of Estonia, Code of Conduct for Civil Servants, and co-authored Public Information Act. Since January 2007, he has worked as a regional ICTD advisor for the Bratislava Center of the UNDP, and from 2007 to 2009, he was seconded by Estonian government to the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, where he was the manager of the e-governance program. Mr. Ivar Tallo has been promoting the use of the information and communication technologies for the public sector leaders, first in Estonia and subsequently in Central and Eastern European countries, Balkan states, the CIS, Arab countries, India, Malaysia, Thailand, and also in Africa, so very extensive experience. He has given e-government lectures to presidents, cabinets of ministers, ministers themselves, speakers of parliaments, and MPs from all around the world. In the last 5 years, he has worked as a team leader in the EU finance project Transactional E-Governance Development in Armenia and as a resident twinning advisor for the e-governance in Georgia II project. Currently, he is advising the Ukrainian and Kazakh governments on e-justice and digital development strategies. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Ivar Tallo.
Okay. Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and let me just summarize it up. I'm standing in front of you as a dinosaur of the digital age. I started with the topic when I was doing my PhD at McGill University, and that was about 25 years ago. And my professors actually at that time actively discouraged me pursuing it. They said that please don't think about it because it's non-topic, that you don't want to become Alvin Toffler. I mean, we have proper university here. Never mind, I persisted and I've been doing it for 25 years, and there were said that I've been around. I've actually worked in 85 countries. So I do have a little bit of knowledge both in terms of geography and in terms of time. I've noticed different things. I've talked about different things. And you are most welcome to ask me questions anytime during the interactions that we have. So I'm not that easily sidetracked, so I can handle this, I guess. But what I'm going to talk to you today about is something that I really haven't talked before. So it is my first lecture really on the topic of forgotten ethics or privatizing or privatization of the rules of conduct, which I find a rather worrisome trend in the world. There hasn't been too much written about it. I know I was actually asked by Rebecca to assign you some readings, and I didn't do it because I really didn't see that many of readings that would be directly relevant. I mean, if you observe the world, you just see it anyway, what is happening. I have a couple of references in the slides that you can follow up, and of course, I mean, now that we have all these search engines, you can find out more if there is any. But I think that partially at least I'm trying to convey you that there are some more diggings to be done or thoughts to be pursued by you. Because I'm already a dinosaur, I'm old and lazy. But where should I start? Let me tell also that how I came about it, and I appreciate very much Professor Takis and Wellesley College inviting me here. But we were with Takis in a SUMI symposium in Greece last summer, and we were listening to a presentation of young, energetic IT entrepreneur talking about AI, or artificial intelligence. And for her, the world was very clear. I mean, and she was very eloquently presenting her case. And when we tried to ask from separate corners of the room some questions, and these questions were not really picked up. I mean, and we, at least, well, we had coffee later, and we felt that there are things beyond optimism that should be taken into account when we think about the technology. And so I'm trying to formulate these things for you and for myself first time. I mean, well, I've been trying to do it a couple of months already, thinking about it, but now it is in more or less systematic way, I hope. So where should we start? I mean, usually when, just to understand what, I mean, I used to be actually, I mean, I'm not an IT person, first of all. So I've been dealing with IT issues all my life. The way how it was possible is because I was trained first as in logic. So, you know, it's a black and white world, like the programmer's world. There are ones and zeros. But the world itself is much more colorful, right? So, but I can relate to the IT people, first of all. But then my more broader exercise was with philosophy. I studied philosophy, and I was teaching public ethics at Tartu University in Estonia. And while doing so, usually students, first time they start to ask questions, well, what's the difference between morality and ethics? So I just put it up just to sort of to explain what I'm going, or what I want to talk about. Because there are, if you actually type in the search word of ethics, and you get a wide variety of issues. And you have been addressing in this lecture series or in your program a wide variety of issues. I mean, we could talk about ethics issues, implications of globalism, or of any other things, but and there are in IT also questions like, maybe the blockchain technology is consuming so much energy that it's not actually good for us, or it is contributing to global warming even. I don't know. I'm not talking about this. I'm going to talk about moral choices of private individuals. So it's a question of morality in one way, or rather autonomy of a person. Whether we can stay humans, or, well, we stay humans, but whether it is the same as it used to be throughout the history. Are we autonomous human beings? Can we be if there are already autonomous machines that we have created? And when we create autonomous machines, they take some space away from us, so we have to start somehow interacting with them. But there are also, apart from these private questions, there are questions of public implications. How we set up the society, how we interact within our communities. So that is the other part that I'm trying to address. And three key concepts. I already talked a little bit about autonomy. I mean, autonomy of a human being, autonomy of staying who we are. I think it's extremely important. I come from a totalitarian society. I mean, my initial sort of upbringing was trying to fight the totalitarian machine, because I was born in Soviet Union, in Estonia that was occupied by the Soviet Union, and because of that we didn't associate ourselves with the regime. We were always kind of trying to keep it at arm's length, but nevertheless this experience from these times and the importance of autonomy of an individual has stayed with me throughout my career. And so the autonomy question is the first one, the trust question is the second one. How can we maintain trust? And I think this is also this kind of more or less eternal question. I mean, you can see it now, I think also in the United States quite well, but also in Europe. In political regimes, there seem to be this kind of liberal world order is cracking up. And there are questions, why is it cracking up and what can we do about it? But it is basically a question of trust. We didn't trust, or at least many of us don't trust certain outcomes, how we live. So how can we maintain trust is always very important for the cohesion. And then the third part is, well, responsibility, accountability actually also, and liability as a form of it. So these kind of questions are what I'm trying to formulate, and I'm sure I can't do too good job, but at least let me try to think about it and get you into this, validate maybe if I have the right concerns. So I would like to start with one case or one aspect. I will bring you 4 different topics, but they all come together into the sort of, you will see, conclusions that, look, some things that used to be a public concern has turned to be used now or deployed by private considerations. And, well, we can later jointly discuss whether it is a desirable outcome or maybe we should design some alternative future. But let me start with social networks. And maybe first I'll bring you an personal experience of mine. When we started to have the ability to react to texts of other people in this kind of easy way, I mean, we have done it throughout the history, of course, commenting on texts that have been written before, but now in the time of social networks, let's take an easy example, some newspaper, I mean, American newspapers also, let's take New York Times. I mean, you can comment the opinion articles, right? And sometimes even, I think, the factual news pieces. But not all comments will be published. I remember back early 2000s when Estonian news portal started to publish articles, and I started to write some comments. I thought it was really good way to communicate within the community. And then what I found, first of all, was that if I signed it with my name, people didn't that much look at what I was writing, but were reacting to my name because I had a public name. I was at the time an MP, a politician, and so a lot of comments were about who I am, not what I had to say. So I stopped signing it with my name. I deployed just a, what do you call it, the short synonym, or just, I mean, I called myself Sync, trying to be in sync with public opinion, you know. But what I discovered again was that after a while, when I wrote these reactions, these reactions started to disappear. I all of a sudden found myself banned from the commenting, because obviously my comments had not been acceptable to this community standard of something. And I mean, I don't have, I can put my hand on my heart and say I never used any bad words. I never did anything really stupid. But nevertheless, there were people or moderators who thought that my comments were not good. So I started actually to think about this question of who gives them the right now to censor me. And I mean, that is from, as I said, more than 15 years ago already, this experience. And I've encountered this a number of times. And I'm wondering, we don't really talk that much about it. Whereas before the time of internet and social networks, we talked a lot about, I mean, when we had two camps, the sort of free world and the totalitarian world. The free world was always crying about the evils of totalitarian system and censorship. And now that Facebook's and whatever Instagrams and whoever are doing something about it, creating these rules, not talking to us really about these rules, we don't really care that much anymore. Why is it so? So that is kind of the formulation, but let me get into this a bit more. It's not that there has been one take for the liberal world and another for the totalitarian world. Within the liberal camp, we have had different normative values guiding our actions also. I mean, different nations or communities of nations have different values as regards to the freedom of expression. And I have actually lived through a case where this kind of debate had rather wide-ranging international implications. I was, I mean, my little claim to fame, you know, it's an era of self-promotion, so what we have to do it. I was a rapporteur of Cybercrime Convention of the Council of Europe. This is the only international legal instrument regulating internet. And so it was done under the auspices of Council of Europe. It was also at the same time wider international efforts. The Americans were participating, the Canadians, the Japanese, South Africans were invited. So, and I had a first-hand sort of or first row seat to see these debates between different people, different understandings. And so one of the biggest debate and really the fiercest was between France and the United States. And it was about the case of France versus Yahoo, which had played out a couple of years before that. Namely, what happened was that Yahoo was selling already online at that time, so 20 years of online sales, was selling Nazi paraphernalia. And France said, well, this is illegal. It has to be taken off the site. And Yahoo said basically, who are you, France, to tell us what to do? We are the company, we decide America is a land of freedom and there is no chance that we are going to give in. And well, the French then trying to get back, were trying to actually undermine the American position in this creation of Cybercrime Convention, because American official position was that it is part of their constitution, the freedom of expression, and therefore it cannot be limited by international convention or something. And actually, at the end, it wasn't. In a way, the way we made the compromise was we took it to a separate legal instrument that the United States didn't sign. But what I'm trying to say is that there have been debates, and these were clearly public debates, but the rules subsequently and have been made by the private companies. The private companies have so much power that they really come into conflict quite often with some customs and the rules of the lands. And there is a case, I mean, it's not that all the rights or the obligations or how we understand each other are universal. We have in different cultures fairly different rules, and you are coming from different cultures, so you have this feeling when you go to some monoethnic state, there is maybe less of this kind of realization that there are so many different values. But nevertheless, I think that currently what is happening, and you can probably certify it with your own experience in different ways, is that there are these private rules or private rulemaking in the case of freedom of expression. Just remember a couple of years ago there was public outcry about censoring certain pictures and art works from the Facebook, I think. Everybody regards it as an art, but somehow Facebook, I don't know, editors or how you call them, censors, decided, well, this is naked body is not allowed, therefore it shouldn't be published there. So this is one of the cases where I say, well, okay, if in this case, again, at the end it comes to a public debate, so it can't stay private, but the rules have been made initially in a very private way. And now, I mean, there is the first real debate, I think, which is over the last year or maybe a bit more, with how the state actors are using these social networks to influence societal outcomes. I mean, think of Trump and or whatever, Putin rather, and attempts to influence elections in different countries. So, I mean, we talk about it somewhat, but not very much. So that is the one point that I wanted to make on this. Now, however, when we talk about these things, it is not really, I mean, if my opinion is not published, I feel bad about it because I put some effort into formulation of this, but it doesn't kill me. I think that now we are in a different situation, actually very quickly approaching different situation. And that is that some of these privately made rules might have lethal consequences. And the question is, are we ready for that? Are we happy with the idea that somebody else is deciding for us what is the right outcome of the dilemma that the decision point is about? I mean, it's easy when it is kind of decision between the property and human condition, human life. We choose human life. But what about the case when there are different human lives involved? Again, I mean, there are these kind of examples. I mean, the most famous dilemmas that these scholarly debates have gone on for longer than the digital age even is a question, for example, if you are going down the road, narrow road, and there are children playing on the road, and you have a choice either to save your life and run over the children, or go to the ravine and kill yourself and save the children. So what is the right moral choice to you as an individual? That's why it is not as a public ethics, but it's also a private moral question, what I'm trying to say. I'm not really talking only about this, but I'm more talking about the fact that now the autonomous driving vehicles are going to be faced with similar choices. And somebody is programming these choices and the resolutions of these choices into the systems. So, and this something is a programmer or programmers. Are they well versed in ethics? Usually not. So what is going to happen? I mean, are we going to be happy as society? I mean, I understand the sort of deployment of self-driving vehicles in the large scale is just 2-3 years away. Are we ready as society to really accept this? So what I want to say first is that we have come from this kind of easier cases of decision to a very sort of serious ones where there could be direct bodily harm to us or to others. And so how should we think about it? There are a couple of sources here that, I mean, it's not that there hasn't been any thought given to the topics. There has been. There is U.S. Department of Transportation has issued a policy guidelines 2 years ago. It was, it's called Federal Automated Vehicles Policy. But when you read it, I mean, it's 100 pages, so it is possible to read, but it's not really something that made me confident or happy after finishing it. Because, I mean, my memory is not that good as some 20 years ago, but let me just try not to quote, but to summarize it. It says basically that, well, these are important, there are important aspects in the self-driving sort of vehicles, but these choices have to be agreed between the different parties, not only by the those who program, but those who drive or use these machines, and those even who are walking on the streets and might be objects of this harm also. So, but it doesn't give guidelines. It just states that yes, there is a problem. Well, it is better than nothing, but it basically allows that, yes, well, it is private decision making, or this kind of, again, abstract community decision making, which, as you all probably have felt when clicking this accept cookies policies that, well, I mean, it has been prepared by the legal departments of these big international corporations, and there isn't much what you can do about it. I think that is not good as such. I think the situation needs to be addressed, and that is what I'm trying to also to convey to you, and maybe we'll find some ways. Actually, apart from the US, this policy guidelines, there is another, and this is much more substantive, and if you are interested in these questions, I would recommend you to look it up and read, and it's only 20 pages. It is called Automated and Connected Driving, and it is a summary of a work done by a commission, by a group of people appointed by the Minister of Transport and Digital Infrastructure of Federal Republic of Germany. But there was a group of people last summer that came together, and there were lawyers, ethics professors, politicians, and they deliberated on the very same issues. And what, I mean, it is interesting to read, or rather, however, what is worrying is that when we come to the second point, that is what is the correct choice, or these dilemma situations, then they basically say, well, these are so difficult questions that we can't really say too much meaningful things about it at the moment yet. But fortunately, our cars, our self-driving vehicles, have not developed to this fifth level of automation, which full automation. So we are not really in need of solving these issues. But at least they accept that there are these kind of very serious issues. And so this is sort of one good example. Now, I would also, when I was doing research on this and looking at what I liked just from this October, last October, there was an article in, or rather I read just about it as a news piece, but there was a large-scale research done on the different values that people have vis-a-vis our behavior in roads. And quite predictably, they came up with, well, yes, actually, we have different values in different societies, which, I mean, by itself is already very good, but it raises more questions than it maybe answers. The article was called Self-Driving Car Dilemmas, revealed that moral choices are not universal. What does it mean? Well, it means that in some societies, people value their own well-being over the well-being of others, maybe more. In some societies, it could be even more difficult dilemmas. But I mean, even when you start thinking about it, and let's forget some physical sort of bodily harm or the question at the moment, when we think about our own driving, it's not very well, no, not that way. It's not totally rule-abiding. I mean, I don't know, maybe some of you will follow the rules. My experience from United States suggests that when you when I was at McGill, I drove down through United States to Florida sometimes, and what I noticed was that the more south you go, the more liberal the understanding of 55 miles per hour speed limit comes. I mean, when you start in New Hampshire, it's really 55 is 55, 57. You go to, somewhere around Philadelphia already, it is 75, you know. But jokes aside, I mean, the rules are made for certain purposes. Rules are not absolute in that sense. Human rules are always made by humans to direct us toward certain good goals. The good goal being safety. But the cars are different with different capabilities. The drivers are with different capabilities. Even the same drivers are have different capabilities in different times. If you are fresh and sort of driving around alert, you can react much faster than when you come home after a long work at the library or whatever. So the rule of 55 is not so important when you are fresh and when the road is clean and the sun is shining, the visibility is 100%. But can we, all these situational variables, can we code them into the self-driving sort of automated system? Probably not. And so there are a lot of questions really, like, okay, let's say that we will start then, everybody of us, and say, computer doesn't make a kind of compromise with the weather and everything. So it goes 55 and not 56, not 57, even if the radar clocks only those going more than 65. Never mind. But let's say, I mean, you have a different situation where you really need to go fast. And let's say it is not that you are late for a date, but it is a question where you have to take your child to the hospital. And if the machine doesn't allow you to go more than 55, well, what do you do? I mean, at the moment when these machines are semi-autonomous, when you have just driver assist systems, then you can make yourself the decisions. You can switch off, you know, now there are all these road safety features that you have, anti-skippery, whatever things. But if it is autonomous, can you switch it off then? And I mean, it is then the larger question, do we still have a control, and up until what time and in what cases we should have the control? And obviously it's not a question only that can be made or argued from the point of view of autonomy that I want to do. There is this other question, and why, let's say, this federal automated vehicle policy is in my mind, to a large degree, skipping these parts of the ethics questions that I want to raise, is that there is a general argument made in this, saying that, well, the overall safety will be higher. So, yes, even if in individual case, maybe somebody will be harmed, the overall road safety will be higher. So we shouldn't worry that much about ethics, is a kind of an implication from there. But it is, no, it can be made sort of as an argument that yes, we shouldn't really give it because to you the decision making back. Because, well, your child is sick and you are in an affect situation, so maybe you are not rational in your decision making and the machine makes a decision better than you do. So, I mean, nothing is black and white. I mean, it's not just ones and zeros. It is a colorful life that we are talking about. And what I'm trying to say is that, again, the problem for me is not deciding at the moment one way or another way. The problem for me is that I haven't seen too much awareness of these issues to be addressed in public debates. But I think that these issues are too important for us to be left for the private corporate actors to decide. So, some more. The case of data protection regulation is another thing that I've been dealing with a long time myself. What I want to say about it, this is one of the cases where there has been a lot of public debate, both in Europe and in North America. It's not that this is kind of hush-hush, no. It is quite a visible case. It also shows quite well that there are, even in liberal societies, very different norms that we follow. And because of that, it raises, like with the case of these different moral issues, what this research showed in different, who is now, I mean, and that's the issue of globalization in a way. Should we reprogram, let's say, the self-driving cars from Myanmar because they have a different regard to the Rohingya life than somebody else? I mean, sorry, I mean, if we have these different basics, is it just American corporations that are going to tell the world how we should live our lives? I mean, now it's Europeans' voice kind of speaking here in front of you. With the data protection regulation, when we go into a bit more into details, what is, and I will explain what I think is the main problem. But let's start from the history. I mean, data protection and the privacy has not been this kind of universal value forever throughout the human history. Very far from that. We start to talk about data protection and privacy laws only after the Second World War. And it is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights where it was kind of written down first, and it was a result of experience from the Second World War. When in 1940, basically, the German forces invaded Netherlands and went into local government, opened the books which had the registries of people, okay, and Jew, Gypsy, and whatever written next to the address and the name, and it was very easy to kind of group these people, signify them, and do certain very nasty things with them. So after that, these Allied forces and our thinking at the time was that, well, we should not let this kind of situation to be repeated. And in 1961, actually, it was when the automated systems became was it 61? Sorry, too early, 81, when there were already large-scale automated systems, and Council of Europe again had a Convention 108, which is about data protection in the automated systems, which was a realistic or real beginning of the data protection ideas. And one of the ideas was that, well, we separated personal data from sensitive personal data. And because of this previous experience, we put into the personal sensitive data the issues of ethnic origin, so that you can't group certain group or different sort of take them out, but it's more has to be individual merit-based, not group-based. And then a medical condition and political beliefs, so that you wouldn't take I don't know, medical condition meaning somebody epileptic side, or even sexual orientation was also that part sensitive data at the time, because people didn't come out of the closet yet. So there was it was seen that only the large groups could actually use this kind of information, and so there were rules. The large organizations were basically the states themselves or the administrations. Now the situation has changed a lot over the last 20 years. And now basically it can be me, my pal and my dog can create a company and find out all kind of sensitive data about people. I mean, we know these cases. We know the case of, remember there was already 10 years ago, I think the joke that what was American company who was sending some family a congratulation note that, well, you are expecting a baby, and the father ran into the store and said, no, we are not. And then the daughter apparently didn't know herself, but was already pregnant. And so, I mean, what we know... Yeah, no, these are real stories. Takes a more recent case of, I don't know how much you have followed this Cambridge Analytica, and actually this ability, which I think is quite frightening, and truly this kind of thing. I was very fascinated when this came out first about 2 years ago. I was listening to different informational sources about it. But I mean that with 30 clicks of likes, dislikes, you can predict with 95% of accuracy whether you are heterosexual or homosexual, your sexual orientation. I mean, 30 autonomous or sort of separate clicks will give this kind of picture. It suggests to me that whoever has this information has actually a lot of control over us. And what I'm trying to drive to and tell you is that it used to be that these powerful government organizations like the intelligence establishment could target certain individuals about their habits, about their circumstances, and then control or at least try to program their behavior. But it was very huge effort. It could have been done only for a certain sort of small number of individuals, so the society could feel relatively free. Now it can be very cheaply done about any of us, almost. I mean, if you're totally outside of social networks, it won't be, but so the question really is, in this data protection thing, is about autonomy of a person again. And I don't think that it has been realized in that extent by any lawmakers, whether on this side of ocean or the other. I mean, in Europe there is, as of last year, a general data protection regulation in force. which American companies don't like at all. I mean, the big IT companies. However, I think that actually, and my good friend was a rapporteur of this convention, and I tried to explain to her that, look, you are not going far enough. She said, well, we can't go any further at all. There are fairly clear limits which American government doesn't accept, or American companies operating outside Europe don't accept. I mean, in Europe they have to. You know, the right to be forgotten, for example, is one of these rights, that you can tell Google to remove yourself from the search under certain circumstances. But again, I mean, it helps us so far, and I think it's not far enough when we think about ourselves as autonomous decision makers. And I think what is, again, these rules have been made, so these ones, the European ones, have been debated, and even in America there are legal regulations that have been debated by Parliament, so we can say that these are have gone through the public debate. So this is good, but I don't think they have really touched the bottom of the issue, which is about this autonomy of a person. Just let me give you a real-life example of, again, it's nothing to do with bodily harm generally, but where our views are so different, and we don't usually recognize it because we don't know about the others. If you would have to divulge your tax data to your neighbor, would you feel comfortable about it? No. Exactly. I mean, it is, most of the world actually thinks that income is kind of a private matter. And, but at the same time, on the data protection issues or the openness issues, when we look at that, there are different models, really. I mean, one where you live mostly is the Anglo-American model. Anglo-American model comes from societal relations, I mean, dating back, going to the Scottish Enlightenment, Hobbes, you remember Leviathan, you've studied it. I mean, it's a government is necessary evil. So we don't want to give too much data to the government. We keep it ourselves. But government has to be there because otherwise we'll cut each other's throats and take the property. So the continental Europe views these relations differently. Continental Europe thinks much more government as a paternalistic figure. So mother, father, I mean, even in language it comes out Vaterland or motherland. And that means that you implicitly trust the government. And therefore, it is easier to give the government permission to do certain things with your data. But it's not even, there are these two big camps, but there is a third one, Scandinavian camp, which actually says that the government is kind of a partner. And in order to have government as a partner, you have to open up on both sides, from the government side and from the societal side. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I mean, in the United States, this sunshine law, the right to know, and all these transparency questions came into forefront in 1976, first time that they were regulated. In Sweden, Swedish kingdom, it was 200 years before, in 1776, which stipulated that all the business of government has to be open. In order to be open, you had to create a regime of trust. Remember, we haven't really talked too much about trust yet. But the trust issue is important, and the way how they did it was not only opening up government, but also then people vis-a-vis each other. They publish in Sweden, in Denmark, in Norway, in Finland, data about everybody's tax obligations. I mean, nobody can hide like Trump is doing. No, these tax returns are private, or they are audited all the time. Yes, sorry. But in Sweden or in Finland, you can see what your neighbor is making, or rather not the sum of what he or she is making or the household, but how much they pay taxes. Because taxes is important part of keeping the community up. So it's your contribution. You shouldn't be sort of shy about it. What I'm just trying to say is that even in these kind of not life and death situations, we have very different values. And we don't realize all the time that these values are there. And the question is, are these big international companies that now reach all over the world with their services, are they imposing, well, they are imposing certain values to all these communities, but they debate these values only amongst themselves, if at all. I mean, so I think it's a big worrying problem. Yes, autonomy of people, and let's get maybe to the most difficult problem, and I will then start to wrapping up ethics and artificial intelligence. I've already said a couple of times that black and white world of programming is not really compatible with richness of life as we see it, or the existence. And as long as we have, we can live with the rules if we can override the rules. I mean, yesterday when I came to Boston, to the Logan Airport, there was these artificial intelligence machines almost. I mean, do I have a piece of paper from analog world here? Yes. It was actually a very interesting sort of experience in many ways. This is a customs declaration to enter US. In Lufthansa, they gave us all and asked us to fill. When we came off from the airplane at the customs, they said, "We don't accept these papers for a year already. Please go to these machines." Okay, fine. I'll go to the machine, I fill in whatever the machine asked me to fill in, and then there was bzzz. I was given a ticket where my face was crossed out. I mean, there was... and told to go to a different line. So, something really happening. So I go to this different line. I don't know whether I have to worry or not. But I mean, the automated process didn't reach a conclusion that would have been easily passed. So it was, I was handed over to a human who was making a decision. So far so good if we have these simple rules. But again, if I continue with this this story, what was kind of funny for me, I was then talking to the immigration officer, and I asked, well, can I know why I was picked out and sent to this other line? And he said, no. Rather uncomfortable. He wasn't I mean, okay, no, but I mean, I was let through, so I'm here standing in front of you. So nothing bad happened. Actually, it was even good because the general lineup was much longer than the one that I had to go through. But the question of transparency got a very negative answer. I mean, he was like, no, you can't know why. I mean, I had to figure out that probably my fingerprints were not visible enough or whatever. But I mean, these are the easy cases. There are rules, yes, no, and then there is a human interaction if no. Even if there is yes and something wrong, I mean, you have the appeal procedure. Now with artificial intelligence, and especially with machine learning, the situation can be rather different. I don't have here the reference to this article, but I was reading about a year ago about the case that in some situations, these learning algorithms have gone so far that those who have initiated them cannot really understand anymore the basis of the outcomes. And actually the suggestion from this article was that we have to create a new normative rule which would say that there has to be a possibility of reverse engineering, so that we would get to this algorithm, apart from learning and doing new things, has to be able to explain why it made the decision it made. And I think it's actually a very sound suggestion, and I think that it is at the moment a very frightening possibility because it hasn't become a universal norm that we have to follow. The complicated choices that then arise, and then it is a question, I mean, how far and how autonomous these computing artifacts can be at the end of the day. If they are living their own life already, if they are self-improving, when do we assign existential value to them? I mean, we might joke now about it and laugh, but I think that in 5-10 years, maybe that is going to be a real-life question. Because we have already sensors that give the data directly to these self-learning algorithms. If they can collect the data, process the data, make decisions based on this data, how much different are they from us? Well, they don't have what we call self-awareness yet. But it's probably a question of yet. I mean, there is all these, the larger philosophical questions. I don't want to go into too many things. I want to talk mostly about the autonomy of a person. But with these self-learning algorithms and possibility of existential awareness, if there is something else autonomous, then ourselves being autonomous, our behavior will be limited to a certain extent. Can we punish a self-learning machine by switching it off, erasing it? Well, yes, at the moment we think they are proprietary for us, so we can, but whether we can in the future, I don't know. So what is important in this regard is that there has to be at least what we have reached, I think, currently. The understanding that there has to be transparency of the decision making and predictability of decisions. If these two conditions are not met, we can't create a situation of trust. If we cannot create situation of trust, I think it is going to be detrimental to the cohesion of the society where these mechanisms are going to be deployed. So, yes, a question of moral responsibility of the machines I will leave to others to decide. Let me now try to wrap up, but just going back into some of the ideas or some of the questions. I mean, the basic questions of robotics and ethics have been around for the last 50 years. So there is no surprise there. I mean, you all have probably in one form or another learned from Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, that the first one being that the robot cannot harm a human being. Second, that the robot must obey the orders of a human being. and the third, that the robot should not harm or should avoid harming itself also if it is not contradicting the first and the second principles. So far, so good. But I think that, and these, I think these principles have lived through the test of time quite long already. But it is also clear that they are not sufficient anymore to do today's world. So that is my point. We need to move forward. Well, I was throughout my talk telling you or alluding that the programmers are not basically the guys who are excelling in ethics. I mean, not that they are bad people, but they have not, ethics is not part of their curriculum, let's put it that way. Well, it's not entirely true in a sense that there have been a couple of computer guys also thinking about rules of ethical behavior and in some limited ways they are doing good. I mean, they are saying that there is a responsibility with these choices that are programmed, and that the programmers have to be aware of the environment where their artifacts are going to be. But if you read through these rules, you will see that they are of quite limited importance. And moreover, what is kind of worrying is that I think, if I remember correctly, there were less than 100 people who have signed off with these rules. And the number of programmers in the world is way beyond 100, I would say. But to sum up the talk and to leave more time for discussion, first, the awareness of ethical implications is low compared to the importance of the questions before us. And I think that the most basic of those is about this autonomy of a person. It is who we are as human beings. Therefore, these discussions are not or should not be just academic exercise. These discussions should be part of the broader curriculum. Second, what is also clear, there is no magic bullet which would say what is right, what is wrong. What we need to do is to just start to mapping this road, mapping the decision points. I mean, I was just trying now, kind of in a semi-dark room, to touch where these issues that I felt were important are, and in relations to the other issues. Third, in order to understand, and not only understand, but feel comfortable in this new reality of the digital world around us, this curriculum, which includes ethics, needs to include kind of a teaching, or first the creation and then a development and the teaching of a basic toolbox of rules of thumb, because it is going to be the same as with cookies of privacy and data protection, that we click without really thinking through those implications. But we need to have kind of some basic rules. Remember when I told you about this border guard who refused to give me the reason why the machine rejected the automated process for me. I think there have to be rules, for example, stating that, look, there has to be transparency, then I can trust the system. But of course, I mean, I understand that it is not universal, because in a sense, what these kind of systems quite often try to do, And there are lots of semi-intelligent systems already that try to catch, for example, tax cheats. If there are the rules how the tax cheats are caught will be open, then it is easier to avoid these rules, right? Well, I mean, that is a debatable question, actually. I mean, that is one of the defenses that is given usually to try to keep the transparency low. But then if we keep the transparency low, we keep the trust low. So maybe the trade-off is still for the full transparency. I would, at the moment, with my knowledge, I would sign this, but I can recognize that there are valid points to the other side. But what is clear to me about, I mean, there can be differences, but there should be this kind of basic rules that we all learn and will be able to apply. And if somebody is not following or some system is not following them, then we can say as human beings that stop, this is not right. Even if I can't really argue to the end whether the right is really right or wrong, but at least I can have fair confidence. Like the 10 Commandments, you know, I mean, thou shalt not kill. I mean, that's very clear. At the same time, yes, well, it can be argued in different ways, and there are different arguments. The right of life, I mean, pro-choice, there are lots of different ethical avenues that we can go. But there are some basic rules that govern our behavior and should govern also in the digital age. And what I also have said and want to repeat over is that there has to be this kind of awareness of different values of different societies. And if we allow just this kind of only universal values to manifest and push upon to all the societies, I think we are going to lose some of the richness of us as a humanity. So, last point, I really haven't talked about this issue, but I will a little bit more, is when we do not know the answers to the questions we have, let's turn to our own history. And what do I mean by that? I mean, there has to, this kind of logical steps explaining everything do not give us the full answers. Mostly our decision making comes through the history. And just as to outline this, do you know St. Augustine? He was a thinker from 4th century, and the biggest, probably, or one of the biggest Christian thinkers. And why I all of a sudden jumped there was that when I was initially approaching this topic, what I tried to kind of explain to you, I felt fairly gloomy, because I can see in my mind at least very clearly how this privatization of ethics rules has taken place over the 20 years. But then when I was thinking back of my university times, and actually his St. Augustine and his Divine City was one of my PhD comprehensive questions, then I started to think better. I mean, there are, you know, the gradation of laws. There is a divine law which kind of explains how the universe is built, and however we cannot know that because we are limited beings as human beings. We cannot know this. We can know the natural law. This is about the right and wrong in the society, in the universe that we know. But even that we might not know to the fullest extent. So we have usually created something that is called human law, that is the basis of legal professions later on and so on. But there is also a situation when we don't have a law yet, when we enter into the territory where we don't know the rules. Then what Augustine suggests is actually that we can take it to ourselves to try to, without mediation, feel the natural law and act upon this. And then later, when we return to society, we can submit and have to submit ourselves to the peer review, as it's a modern terminology suggests, that the others will judge whether we have done right or wrong. So I think with these legal rules or these ethical questions, it could be that we'll do this in the private sort of way now. The companies are doing it. But probably sooner or later the society will catch up. But let's hope that with the help of you and us all, we can do it sooner rather than later, not to feel too sorry about everything. So thank you very much for your attention.